Hello everyone, this is part 13 of What If Naruto Formed a New Team, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The soft sound of rustling leaves soothed him in the darkness, taking his mind off of the silence and emptiness all around him. Maybe you should get going now, Naruto. You have much to do today. Yeah, I guess you're right. A pause. Say, can you tell me where this place is? The voice was amused. Naruto could tell by the chuckling, you already know where you are. Oh, I do. Of course. He took a moment to consider it, examining his memories. Well, I guess this place is pretty familiar. You should really get ready now. Gaara and Haku are waiting. Hey, how do you know about my friends? Still, with an amused inflection, how could I not know about them? Just who are you anyway? I don't know you. You know me much better than you realize. What the heck are you talking about? The gentle crescendo of leaves began to fade. They're waiting for you. Hey wait, just tell me who you. Wake up now. Naruto's eyes blinked open, peering up at the ceiling from beneath his golden bangs. His dream had left him confused, and unlike his other dreams he felt he wasn't likely to forget about this one. It was creepy. What person who I don't know could know about Haku-kun and Gaara-kun? He sat up and stretched fitfully, deciding to push it to the back of his mind. It had only been a day since the preliminary matches and already Naruto had too much on his mind to rest peacefully any longer. The sun shone through his window brightly. I slept in pretty late. Naruto was not going to beat himself up about it. Readjusting to his normal sleeping pattern after the main part of the exam had been difficult. He dressed himself mechanically and proceeded onward while yawning, following the smell of food that hung in the air. Gaara greeted him at the table with a friendly blink. Haku, predictably, had prepared breakfast and left it out for them before he had left. Naruto sat across from his red-haired friend silently, too sleepy to begin a coherent conversation. Gaara regarded him inquisitively for a moment as he chewed, wondering where all his energy had gone. Haku-kun went to the hospital to see Sakura-chan a while ago. Gaara stated, noting how life seemed to return to the blonde boy's features. Oh, then we should go there too. Naruto replied and then glanced down at his untouched miso soup. Let me just finish this first. Gaara watched as Naruto proceeded to inhale the noodles, not in the least afraid of how very much he resembled a vacuum cleaner. We won't be going just yet. Befuddled, Naruto continued his slurping while still managing to ask, why's that? A far-off look came over the redhead's face. There are two people who I want you to meet first. Haku lifted the pink orchids from the vase after inspecting them carefully. These will do. She won't want anything too extravagant. He had taken the liberty to stop by the Yamanaka flower shop to get gifts for Sakura and Hinata, orchids for Sakura and white iris for Hinata. Since neither Naruto nor Gaara had been able to wake up early enough, he had gone ahead without them, as usual. Ino sat at the counter watching him in fascination. It wasn't often that boys stopped by to pick up flowers, but she was well aware of why he had come. Good morning, Ino-san, she smiled at his formal greeting. I hope you're feeling better since the exam. Ino shrugged, trying to hide her humiliation. I'm feeling fine, Haku-kun. She eyed the flowers he had chosen. Forehead girl will definitely like those. Tell her I said hello and that I don't plan on surrendering Sasuke-kun to her anytime soon. He handed the money over, wearing a sheepish expression. I doubt that Sakura-chan is competing for Sasuke at all. I will, Ino-san. Haku decided to be compliant while she handed him his change. Oh. I thought you might like to know that Naruto-kun has informed me that I will be facing Temari of the Sand in the final round. She raised a fine, blonde eyebrow. Oh. Well, do me a favor and beat her, eh? Be careful though, Haku-kun, there's something wrong with that girl. He nodded to her before leaving, taking Ino's advice into account. Hinata sat quietly, staring down at her hands folded in her lap. She found it strange how with those very hands she had dared challenge her older cousin, a living prodigy, and with those very same hands failed to defeat him. Being the honest person she was, Hinata could admit she hadn't expected to win her match against Neji. Something told her that it was the act of trying to defeat him that held more value than the victory itself. Maybe at some point Neji had realized that. Hinata couldn't say for certain if her cousin had any revelations at all once he had thrown her down, no matter how much she hoped he had. Neji, as expected, was the stronger of the two. Her father, her sister, her friends and her entire clan were aware of it. Some denied that fact and some openly broadcasted it. And while all of their attention dawdled on her cousin, she was pushed to the wayside, free to live and train as she saw fit. That was until the pressures of being the heir to Hyuga and her father's disappointed gaze returned to her. She wished more than anything to become a strong, respectable leader for her clan, but with time Hinata had come to understand that she had not become a shinobi to fulfill her father's expectations of her. She had done it for herself. Now she was having difficulty remembering why. Most especially after having spoken with her father, who had mentioned the possibility of being demoted and the tarnishing of the Hyuga name at the cost of her failure during the exam. Hinata sniffled, fighting the frustrated tears threatening her pearly eyes. What good would come of crying anymore? She had hit rock bottom and she could only work her way up from where she had landed herself. The idea didn't make it any less difficult for her to keep trying. Her clan had never had that much faith in her anyway, so why not start anew? She took a deep, steadying breath, disliking the overly sanitized smell of her hospital room, and shifted beneath her blanket, hiding her pale hands beneath it so she would no longer have to look at them and be reminded of her failure. There was a knock at the door. Hinata looked up, anxious. A fair number of visitors had come to see her since she had arrived at the hospital, yet Naruto and Gaara hadn't been to see her yet. Her last visitors had actually been Ino, Shikamaru and Chuji, who had brought her an assortment of barbecue which she didn't have the heart to tell them she most likely wouldn't eat. She had appreciated their concern nonetheless. The second knock was brief and less intrusive. That's when she had known it was not Naruto. And probably not the nurse either, because she tended to announce her presence. Hinata blinked her white eyes curiously as Tenten slipped inside. Oddly, neither Neji, Lee or her energetic sensei were with her. The brown-haired girl wore a cheerful smile at the sight of her awakened unharmed. The last time she had seen Hinata she had been indistinguishable from a punching bag. Hey there, Hinata-san. Tenten paused briefly, noting all the "get well soon" gifts at her bedside. I'm sorry that I didn't bring a present for you or anything. No. It isn't necessary. Hinata found it strange how very little she actually knew about Tenten. Funny how these things worked. The weapons specialist sat down in a vacant chair beside the bed while Hinata scooted further under her blanket shyly. Tenten regarded her speculatively for a moment. I hope you're feeling all right. I'm feeling much better, thank you. Good, I'm glad. Truthfully she was, but Tenten frowned as she thought, she's so timid around me. It's probably because I'm Neji's teammate. She hadn't come here with the intentions of threatening Hinata and she'd prove it too. Tenten-san. The weapons specialist reasserted her attention as Hinata continued, is there any particular reason that you've come here? I'll give her credit, nothing gets past her. Tenten decided, expecting Hinata to be the sort of person who got straight to the heart of the matter. The brown-haired girl nodded in confirmation. I skipped out on training to make sure that you were okay. Hinata's embarrassment meter escalated a few notches at the news. Look, Hinata, Neji wasn't himself in that fight. Tenten attempted to explain it but found that she couldn't, and I wasn't really myself in my own fight either. Her guilty expression caused Hinata to take immediate, do not make visitor feel bad, action. Sakura-chan is fine, I'm sure. She was glad to see Tenten's expression lighten. Haku-kun told me so when he stopped by to see me earlier. That's Haku for you. Tenten smiled, grateful to him. Hinata found herself sitting cross-legged. It was a habit she was picking up from spending time with Naruto. She was relieved that her father wasn't around to see such behavior. I just wanted to apologize on Neji's behalf if he hasn't already. Tenten summed up the point of her visit. What happened during the exam? It wasn't personal. Sadly, Hinata had to disagree. Everything about her match had been personal for the both of them. Instead of protesting, she nodded politely, accepting the apology in good grace. Are things going to be all right in your clan? Tenten, unintentionally, had hit the nail right on the head. Hinata's face saddened considerably before she answered, I've already spoken with my father. It was troubling enough to hear that her own father had to have a serious talk with her while she was still in the hospital, of all places, but Tenten was aware that it hadn't been a pleasant conversation either. I see. Tenten found her spirits dampen for the younger girl, wishing that Neji could stop causing so much grief for her. You don't have to worry, Tenten-san, Hinata assured her. Her voice was a little braver than what it had been. I know that I will be all right. It was quiet for a long moment, and in that time Hinata considered that maybe Tenten hadn't believed her reassuring proclamation. Tenten stood, an uncanny serious look on her face. You just feel better then, Hinata. I'll see you soon. Hinata unmasked herself with her blanket, just a margin. The weapons specialist closed the door gently behind her and began her ritual walk to her team's training grounds. She was deep in thought and she did not care that she was late. She was surprised to find that her new favorite member of the Hyuga family was Hinata. It was the first time she had ever placed Neji second, to his cousin of all people. Haku had wondered how he had managed to land himself at Ichiraku Ramen without Naruto or Gaara with him. He supposed that the closest explanation he could supply for himself was that while on his way home Sato had grabbed him unexpectedly and forced him into the seat beside an equally unenthralled Shino. The silver-haired nin had declared they should celebrate his victory, his treat. So Haku had stayed, listening to the recap of the last fights he had missed during the exam. Shino did well to correct Sato's exaggerations of some of the matches. Sato chewed lazily on a pickled vegetable and asked, Hey, where are Naruto and Gaara anyway, Haku-kun? I thought they'd be hanging around with you at a time like this. Actually, I'm not so sure where they are at the moment. Haku lowered his chopsticks in thought, knowing the smell of food would have definitely woken them. They should have been here by now. They are easily sidetracked. Shino predicted their course of action. They will turn up here eventually. True, Naruto and Gaara did have a favorite restaurant, and Haku knew the place very well by now. It was only a matter of time. Maybe they went with your sensei to train, Sato suggested, crunching a piece of shrimp, just to get a head start on the exam. Not a bad idea for us either, eh Shino-kun? Shino's expression was bland. Only you have advanced to the final round. So what? The silver-haired boy was indignant. You can kick my easy. I need to get as much training done as I can get if I'm gonna face Gaara-kun. Sato shuddered at the thought and Shino smirked, glad that he was taking the fight seriously. Haku was still stuck on the mentioning of Jiraiya. Their last encounter had not been a friendly one. Why didn't you say anything? The Sennin's face was red with anger as he had to resort to scolding his brightest and most reliable pupil. He had taken Haku to the other side of the tower after his match and began the preparations to seal the mark on the boy's N. Haku sat shirtless in the center of a seal that Jiraiya had drawn on the stone floor, flinching as his mentor roughly painted markings on his back. I didn't know what the seal was capable of, sensei. That doesn't matter. Jiraiya wouldn't put up with excuses. I won't let Orochimaru turn you into one of his pawns in his little game. Not you or the other squirts, you hear me. Slightly traumatized, Haku nodded, coming to grips with the magnitude of the situation. I'm sorry Jiraiya-sensei. I will never let it happen again. He lowered his eyes in apology, realizing that the Toad Sage only wanted his safety even if it meant screaming at him. We'll see. Jiraiya had calmed down. Just a little. I just can't understand why you didn't tell me. Do you realize that this mark could have KU? It should have. Haku remained silent. The Sennin frowned, noting the boy's submissive behavior, and he took it as a good sign. If he was scared, it meant he understood. You need to hold still while I seal this mark on your N. Do you understand, Haku? Yes, sensei. Jiraiya laid his hand over the mark, noticing how Haku's back straightened in anxiety. Fujihoin. The seals Jiraiya had painted on Haku's skin earlier upwards toward his N and formed a ring around the scaled marks there. The dark-haired boy's cry of pain was short when he passed out from the pressure. It had gone quickly and successfully, and Haku had been too exhausted either way to stay conscious. Jiraiya knew the boy would thank him later. There, that should hold it. Jiraiya sighed heavily, patting Haku's head. You know, squirt, you're the dumbest smart person I've ever met. The dark-haired boy was still shaking in pain, unresponsive. This seal is only as strong as your willpower is, kid, Jiraiya muttered, half to himself, make sure you stay in control. Haku gingerly touched the sealed mark on his N, remembering some of what had transpired, as well as his sensei's very loud and outraged warning of Orochimaru's treachery. I'll look for them later. Haku decided aloud, deciding to take Sato up on his generous offer. The silver-haired boy shrugged before waving Ayami over. Yo, miss. Do you have coffee here? Hey, Gaara, just where exactly are we going anyway? Naruto walked alongside his friend, his arms folded behind his head. At least let me know that much if you've got to be so secretive and stuff. The blonde nin had a suspicious feeling ever since breakfast that morning. Gaara had been acting strangely, more so than usual. It was apparent to Naruto that he was having a difficult time trying to explain himself, rather than keeping things short and sweet as he normally did. That means something big is up. Naruto surmised, watching Gaara give him a shifty sideways glance. He's thinking way too much. He can't focus. It isn't far now. Naruto nodded, scowling moodily at the red-haired boy. Yep, 'cause that really helps you know. What's so important, huh? If there's anyone you can tell, it's me. Gaara's pace sped up just a fraction. I am going to introduce you to my brother and sister. He was glad he ignored Naruto's dropped jaw, and right on schedule, you have siblings. They veered off course and stepped out onto the side of the road, where Naruto could reassemble his jumbled wits. Gaara found it hard to answer vocally in the affirmative, so he just offered his friend his most compassionate nod. Naruto ran a shaky hand through his golden hair, breathing deeply. Then, how come you never told us? You never asked. Now was not the time for his cranky retorts, he knew, but Gaara just couldn't pin the reason down. It felt like if he did tell while still living with Naruto and Haku, that it would make them less family than the real one he still had back in Suna. But didn't you want to talk about them even a little? Naruto was desperately trying to make sense of it. You can trust Haku-kun and me. He could admit he felt more attachment to his goofy friends than his own F&B, but Gaara still felt the pressure to mend his broken past. He couldn't do that if he turned his back on his true family. I do trust you, but I do not trust myself, Gaara admitted, begrudgingly. The life I left behind was a disaster. When I came here, the only thing that came naturally was to let it go. It was quiet for a long moment, and the red-haired boy felt like he couldn't look at Naruto. Guilt washed over him at the sight of the blonde, and he couldn't bear it at all. To his shock, Naruto only grinned. He always did have a quick acceptance complex. Well, cool. So they're from the Sand Village, right? They continued walking, and Gaara found the subject open up with such ease he couldn't help but press to the point of the matter. Naruto had that effect on people. They are. He paused thoughtfully. You've already seen 'em, actually. Whoa, I have. Well, where are we supposed to meet them? Outside of the academy. Naruto nodded in confirmation, even though he still hadn't caught on fully. When did you get the chance to talk to them? After the second stage of the exam. The missing piece clicked in Naruto's head, and he then recalled the two formidable sand shinobi who had, like Gaara, progressed to the final round, with the exception of the trash-talking bastard of their team. He frowned. Wait a minute, aren't they mad that you four, busting up the teammate? Gaara's chuckle was dark and pleased. Surprisingly, no. Naruto felt his spirit lighten at the sight of Gaara, happy for once. Rather than the brooding, calculating, stubborn exterior he had often seen, Naruto was glad that his friend had something to not be so irritable about. Naruto looked forward to meeting the other members of Gaara's family tree. Upon arriving at her team's training grounds, Tenten discovered Lee training alone just as enthusiastically as ever. He was thoroughly disciplining a training post with round after round of punches. Lee. She watched curiously as he seemed to bounce over to her like an obedient puppy. She found it just as endearing as it was scary. Where's Neji? Our teammate has been detained at a meeting at the Hyuga household, Tenten, Lee announced, looking helpful. This I know with certainty, for I have gone there to check myself and was promptly dismissed. It looked important. Tenten didn't fight the sigh of exasperation she gave in response to Lee's update. So that was the way it was. Neji had thrown his clan for a loop, and now they had to decide what to do with him. Peachy. I just can't believe that he's getting all this grandeur for beating on his younger cousin, Lee. Tenten leaned against a nearby birch tree, where he took a space beside her, listening intently. He was partially unnerved by her foul mood and wanted to dispel it, but it means a lot to him, Tenten, and who are we to interfere with his goals and clan life? I don't know, maybe his logical teammates. The friends who can keep him on the straight and narrow. Pick one. She felt bad that she had snapped at him, but then was even more troubled that she had used the term, friends. Tenten gave a semi-horrified look to the green beast of Konoha. We are his friends, right? I would say so, Lee agreed, then added gloomily, although, I am unsure if it is a mutual viewpoint. Neji never really had tried to bond with them beyond the point of training and missions. It was hard to tell if there was anything more he had bothered to work on. What I mean is, do the ends justify the means? I've been to see her, Lee, and things don't look so good. She was grateful she could always confide in him on just about anything. What do you think? Perhaps he could have used more restraint. There it was. So it wasn't just her. Tenten was glad about that there was proof that there were others who found the Hyuga clan's structure to be questionable. As well as the stability of Neji's psyche, for that matter. Guy had somehow snuck up on them. He appeared on the opposite side of the clearing and he was not alone. Tenten. Lee. My youthful students. We have a guest with us today. Oh joy. And to think for a moment Tenten had actually believed Neji had ditched the old Hyuga buzzards and joined his team for a helpful day of training before the final stage of the exam arrived in only a few weeks. It was sad how much she expected of him. They approached curiously. Lee, of course, was a bit more chipper at the sight of the newcomer. Hi guys. A familiar face, thankfully, had replaced Neji. I'll be training with you for the day since I'm off from work. Uncle Guy said you wouldn't mind. Hey Tama. Tenten opted for being friendly since her sensei's niece wasn't nearly as crazy as her uncle. You should stop by more often, of course we don't mind. Lee was predictably ecstatic. Miss Tama. It is so good to see you again. Guy sensei, do you know what's holding up Neji? Tenten felt a second opinion may clarify some things. Not that she doubted Lee, but some time had passed. I was informed he is at a promotion ceremony, Guy recalled, not announcing his source. He should be back with us by tomorrow, I can assure you. Tenten chose then to dismiss the matter until tomorrow. Tama looked like she would be a challenge and was rumored to specialize in taijutsu. Isn't she a dancer? Or a baker or something? Lee didn't seem to care as to why Tama had visited as long as she planned on bringing more youthful sunshine to their team. I'm aware that you have only met briefly a few times before. Guy's introduction of Tama was less flowery than usual, but you'll both be pleased to hear that at the time Tama attended the academy she was a genius of hard work. That was all it took for Lee to be inspired. Tears began to roll down the boy's cheeks in the likeness of his sensei. Tama patted his back worriedly, knowing how sensitive he could be at times. Are you okay, Lee? Guy continued, thinking it was going well. My beloved niece was renowned for her taijutsu, much like myself. It is the Mito-bi that creates true hard-working shinobi. Naturally he just had to brag a bit, since this was an opportunity for it. Tama's sheepish chuckle carried with it a tone of annoyance. Guy was exaggerating, but that was to be expected. Tenten, however, was as impressed as Lee had been. So Tama was in fact a shinobi in spite of the fact she had other occupations. She could say the same for herself with regards to her weapon forging business. She decided to break the ice. I never knew you were a Kanoiki, Tama. Her approximated guess wagered that being that the girl was about 15 and so she had to be a Chunin, so, where's your hit I ate? It was not visibly displayed, at least not to Tenten at the moment. Tama's smile weakened. I never got one. There was an uncomfortable silence. How can that be? Lee's outrage was well contained. If you have such talent, then why has that not been acknowledged? Guy was about to brush the subject aside but Tama decided to answer, not very much bothered by the idea. There was an accident that forced me to retire early from the ninja academy. Her uncle's face saddened at the memory. Apparently something had not gone right when she had started on the path to becoming a shinobi. Tenten and Lee wisely decided to drop the subject. Tama, not very disgruntled at all, continued, now, who wants to train with me first? Huh. I didn't come out here to just stand around. Lee's hand shot up immediately. Naruto's astonished voice was low and anxious. Wow. You really do look like them. I never noticed that before. Temari frowned at the sight of Naruto, recalling him from the preliminary rounds. He hadn't been half bad of a fighter either, but he had been loud and quirky. She turned to Gaara, who stood beside his friend, looking stilted. I thought you said you were bringing both of them. Haku chose to sulk off. The redhead answered simply, not really sure what had happened to him. Figures. Kankuro responded with arms folded across his sea. There isn't really a rush either. This is good for now. Naruto was still very perplexed. Just who are you people? You act just like Gaara. That much was apparent. Temari's smile was friendly. We are Temari and Kankuro of the Sand. And you're supposed to be Gaara-kun's brother and sister. He couldn't help but be skeptical. It was a bit far-fetched after all. Kankuro nodded. You got that right. Gaara chose to remain silent for the time being. Their interaction was so amusing it would be a travesty to interfere. Naruto, unlike his teammate, wasn't as amused. He didn't like the fact that these people could show up out of nowhere one day and claim things such as family ties. It was a serious matter in his opinion. Then what the hell took you so long to find him, huh? Can you tell me that? Our father assured us that he was S. What were we supposed to do? Temari was also touchy about the subject. We had no way of knowing he was alive or where he was. Don't make it seem like we're the ones to blame. Things were getting a bit tense. Gaara did not feel like discussing such a painful matter, so he merely changed the subject. Where's your teammate? Kankuro's frown was emphasized by the markings painted on his face. He's at the hospital. He hasn't shut up since the match. It was with that notion Naruto was reminded of a pressingly more important matter. Oh yeah. The hospital. I better get going and see Sakura-chan and Hinata-chan. Gaara gave a quizzical look to his friend who had turned to face his siblings, a bit awkwardly. It was nice meeting you, Temari and Kankuro. I'll talk to you guys another time. I've really gotta go right now. Naruto darted off a moment later, hoping he had been polite enough. His impression of Gaara's brother and sister had been what he had anticipated them to be, duplicates of Gaara, except older. He's interesting, Kankuro observed, and you've lived with him for how long? Ever since I left. You can go with him if you want, Gaara. Temari notified him, aware of his anxious expression. We'll meet up with you later. Gaara hesitated for a moment, considering the idea. He then nodded to them and quietly followed after Naruto. It had gone quite well. 3 days later, Kurenai could honestly say she had never been brought out to a nice restaurant before by a younger man, especially a man who was 12 and kept snapping pictures of unwilling people on the way there. They were seated at a small table out in front of the establishment, out in the sunlight. Kurenai frowned at him as he fiddled with his camera. Sato, may I ask what this is all about? I'll tell it to you straight, sensei, the young Hatake caved. This isn't a date. If it had been, you would have regretted it. She warned. She would have happily smacked him back to his senses. You see, I've been having trouble with a technique I've been working on. Sato explained, his dark eyes shifting nervously about the place. Kurenai could tell something serious was afoot. What is the nature of this problem? As his mentor, it was her ritual duty to spare him from certain destruction. As an answer, the silver-haired boy handed her a photograph which she took from him with a questioning look. After a moment, she frowned at him. Sato, this is a picture of the academy with no roof. Whoops. Wrong one. He took it from her and riffled around through a small pouch of other pictures he kept on hand. Sato handed her a different photo, this time certain it would explain his query. The waiter stopped by while she inspected the picture, so Sato took the liberty of ordering for the both of them, coffee for me please and shochu on the rocks for my sensei here. The man taking his order frowned at him, taking him for a punker kid. That's a bit strong, don't you think? Not for my sensei. He had confidence in Kurenai, or at least in her tolerance of alcohol. Astounded and slightly insulted, the waiter left, muttering to himself in irritation. After a long moment, Kurenai looked up at her pupil. I've determined that this photograph clarifies nothing. Sato grinned at her, but you know a picture says 1,000 words. Her glare silenced him. The boy sighed heavily, deciding to get to the root of the matter. Sensei, I took that picture a mile away from her. Kurenai's ruby eyes widened in understanding. I see your point. It's like this, sensei, Sato began, looking a bit distressed. I never met my dad, but Mom refused to get rid of his stuff after The waiter returned with the drinks and set him down. I see. Kurenai nodded. That explains where you got this summoning contract from. It is not typical of the Hitaki family. Yeah, well, the boss that my old man originally called S 2 days ago apparently, a nervous look came over his pale face, the new boss, if I get around to summoning her that is. I don't know if she'll tolerate me or if any of the others for that matter. That is problematic. Kurenai answered darkly, there is only one way for you to find out with certainty. Sato frowned, I'm serious sensei. A new leader of the flock might make my contract invalid. I mean, it's all the way from Hidden Dragonfly, it's not like I can renew it or something. The waiter returned and set the drinks down without a word. Why did you come to me with a dilemma such as this then? Kurenai could name another silver-haired nin who'd be able to relate to Sato, how am I supposed to help you? Well, I'm not exactly sure how to talk to a girl leader. He admitted, sheepishly, I was hoping you could help me out. If it was something that basic he had a lot to work on. She was flattered that he considered her the foremost female authority he knew. Sato, I'm not so sure about this particular situation. She muttered, weighing the prospects, it doesn't look too good. I can supervise you during your appeal to the new leader, however I cannot guarantee you won't be harmed. Kurenai took a proprietary sip of her drink, ignoring Sato's horrified face. When Naruto had woke up the following morning both Haku and Gaara were gone. It was something he was getting used to, they had different agendas after all, Gaara reconnecting with his siblings and Haku, well, he wasn't so sure what Haku was up to. After dressing and a delightful breakfast of ramen Naruto set out for the Hyuga compound. He had been told Hinata had been discharged from the hospital perfectly healthy, but he felt it would be a good idea to see for himself. Not many of the white-eyed people were about the estate that day, he had noticed after jumping the wall and entering. What that indicated he didn't know, and Naruto had made a beeline to Hinata's bedroom window which had been left open. Hey, Hinata-chan. You're feeling better. She wasn't present. He frowned, plotting the next course he should take in order to locate her. Naruto by now had a thorough cognitive map of the estate in his head. Out on a nearby porch, he noticed Hanabi, who wasn't nearly so pleased to see him. Yo. Hinata's sister. That certainly got her attention. Where's Hinata-chan? With a sigh of irritation, she responded, she is on the eastern side of the grounds and my name is Hanabi, you fool. Right. Sorry. He moved across the sunny lawn, hands jammed into his pockets, I wonder, maybe Neji's around here. It had occurred to Naruto that encountering his opponent before the final match would be terribly awkward, especially with the fact that the only thing he could think to do once he saw Hinata's cousin was to beat him upside the head. Naruto kept a wary eye open for the Hyuga prodigy, I'll beat him. I will. He can't go around thinking that it's alright to just bulldoze everyone in your path, he's got to learn to compromise just like me, Gaara and Haku have. He bumped headlong into someone, too deep in his own thoughts to see where he was going. Hiyashi turned around to face him, annoyed, giving him an inquiring expression. Whoa, Hyuga-sama, I didn't see you there. Naruto had been told countless times by Haku to address Hinata's father properly and now it was second nature, even if it came out a bit goofy. Is there something you need, Uzumaki-san? The clan head had grown startlingly tolerant of Naruto. The blonde boy paused in thought, no, I'm good. I'm just looking for Hinata-chan. Of course. Hiyashi walked away, not very interested. Naruto continued on noting that, as of recently, that was the most Hiyashi had spoken to him. He couldn't tell if the clan head was stingy simply because of his knowledge of him being the QB container or if he needed better people skills. It could have quite possibly been a bit of both. As Hanabi had instructed, the eastern garden had occupants. The blonde boy was momentarily startled by the presence of his Junin sensei standing nearby as Hinata tossed feed into the koi pond, answering his questions. Naruto exploded onto the scene, attacking Jiraiya and he was easily evaded. He had surprised the pale-eyed girl, Grr. What the hell do you think you're doing here, Ero-sensei? The toad sage raised his eyebrows, so you finally showed up, Naruto. And what's with that hostile tone, eh? Just visiting is all. He frowned at the blonde nin. Princess here has begun to use shadow clones, I hear. It's a bit dangerous, don't you think? Oh crap. He had forgotten about that. He decided to play dumb and grinned. Yeah. How about that? Hinata's face was very, adorably red. Jiraiya pulled Naruto by the ear, leaning in close so he could whisper, that is a Junin-level technique. If she gets hurt while using it, you know who to blame, right? Naruto nodded, frustrated, but he also understood Hinata needed training and discipline to master the jutsu. I've said my piece, Jiraiya announced, drawing out his pipe. He waved goodbye to Hinata before he had left. Naruto had wondered if there had been a double meaning, perhaps, in his sensei's method of communication. Oh, whatever. He's just being a crazy, old pervert again. Hinata's smile was meant to be welcoming, but it was sad and frail. It was upsetting him immensely and he wished that she'd do away with it. Naruto swallowed before he spoke. Hey Hinata-chan, how are you feeling? She hadn't the ability to lie about her current state, but she could delay the subject, if only a little. I would like to be somewhere else right now. His blue eyes softened. He could fix that, he just needed to know how. Sure. Where do want to go? Somewhere far away from here. Naruto nodded. You got it. Just follow me. I know this place, well, you'll see. She hadn't once questioned him on their way to the Hokage monument, even if it had been a slightly longer trip with a companion by his side. Naruto had settled in his usual spot overlooking the village and Hinata sat down beside him, very quiet and very bemused. Hinata had, being the attentive girl she was, noticed which Hokage's head they were roosted on. She made no comment about it and gazed out over the city below, hoping she wouldn't cry. She had missed him so much and it was slightly overwhelming that he had rescued her from the intolerable stiffness of the Hyuga compound. He broke the silence, even if it had been peaceful, it needed to be done. Is everything going to be alright with your family? She shook her head. Her smile was gone. My father is, so upset with me. I knew he would be, but still, there was a chance that I could have made him proud. I thought maybe. Hinata-chan, I told you, I'm going to help you. Naruto wouldn't stand for it. I'll make Neji and your dad come to their senses. They just don't get it. I just don't know anymore. Hinata was uncertain and her faith had been shaken since her match. It was quiet after that and Naruto waited for her voice to return so she would pour out all of her worries for him to hear, just like Gaara and Haku would when they were frustrated. But it never happened. Her silence was chilling and he could feel the pain and effort it took for her to keep all of her thoughts bottled up inside. He would wait. It didn't matter to him how long it took. He believed in her and was sure she had yet to bloom. I think that the only way I can help you is if you help me a bit first. Naruto scratched his arm, thinking of what to say. What I mean is, you'll have to put me through the ropes of gentle fist and stuff if I'm gonna pound Neji, you know. I've seen you and you're amazing, he thought. It was strange how he never said the word but she had still heard it, somehow. She refused to let him down. He was the last person on earth that she would abandon. I'll do my best to help you, Naruto-kun. I can get you prepared, but, her voice lowered, you will have to look after Gaara-kun and Haku-kun as well. They need you two to prepare for the tournament. Hinata rubbed absently at her eyes. They were hurting again. Naruto had noticed. Hey, you feeling a bit sleepy? We can go back if you want. And no, I'm not tired. She didn't elaborate further so he let it go. After a long moment he chuckled. Hey. Ero-sensei didn't know I taught you how to make shadow clones. I guess I surprised him. Well, you surprised him. It's a jutsu not many people can do, you know. A small smile appeared on her lips. It was getting easier for her to remember how. He stopped by and said that you probably shouldn't have showed me, but he was proud of me. Her smile brightened. It made me happy that he was pleased. Naruto could understand her reasoning. Her father was almost never pleased with her, so she must have been glad at least Jiraiya had seen potential in her. It was a start. Yeah, and I bet your sensei is proud of you too, right? He couldn't help but add to the idea. Hinata hugged her knees to her, nodding, yes, you're right. Kurenai-sensei was glad too. You're getting stronger, I told you. Naruto glanced over to her, smiling. The only person who has a hard time believing that is you. Color returned to her cheeks and she changed the subject. When you came to see me at the hospital, you said that you met Gaara-kun's brother and sister. You never told me what they were like. Oh yeah. That's right. Naruto nodded, remembering the news from days earlier. Overall, they're mostly just like he is. Except that they live in the sand village. He smirked at the thought. Come to think of it, he hangs out with them a lot. I can see why. I've got to say, I liked them. Uchiha Sasuke and Haku-kun have both been admitted to the final round. Just as you predicted, Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto had become the main informant for Orochimaru in terms of what was happening in Leaf. Very good, Kabuto-kun. The snake shinobi was pleased, and folded his arms as he leaned contentedly on a wall in the alleyway. And what of our one-tailed friend? The Ichibi has made contact with 2 of our sand agents. It's only a matter of time now. Kabuto had also been following the movements of Baki's team. He'll be all too easy to control once he's tamed. Orochimaru's chuckle was merciless. Excellent. Gaara-kun will play a key role in the destruction of Konoha. Delightful, isn't it? Kabuto remained silent but had nodded in agreement. He didn't have much love for the sand manipulator. Yes, it won't be much longer now. Orochimaru's plans were already being set into motion. Team Guy had anticipated the day to be just another normal day of training. Neji's training with Tenten had continued as it usually did, as did Lee's training with their sensei. Neji had been reunited with his team, greeting them with the subtle news that he was being considered by the council of his clan to become the next clan heir in Hinata's stead. Needless to say, Tenten was not pleased with the update, even if she had pretended to be. Her discontent became more and more obvious throughout the morning, in which knives and sickles she had been throwing had been launched just a fraction too fast, or the senbon had been aimed peculiarly close to fatal areas. She had summoned a short sword after a while to keep his Yukin at bay, which was also, like she, becoming steadily fiercer. How can this be happening? He shouldn't be allowed to achieve his goals this way. Her S were wild as she thought, her attention had been divided down the middle, and she tried so hard. It became silent when they had separated, circling each other as they searched for an opening. The Byakugan was thoroughly scanning her for weaknesses and could not immediately detect any. She was a radiant, angry being and Neji was not sensible enough to back down. An aggressive foe was a challenging one. Guy was aware of the change in attitude across the field between his 2 other students. They had gone from snappish battle cries to total, quiet. It was the quiet that he was familiar with only when a ninja battle was beginning. It made Guy uneasy. It wasn't like them. They sprang, relentless and stubborn, and Tenten had found the time to summon a second sword that no more lethal than the one she already had, but 2 hands meant twice the speed, forcing Neji to compensate. He batted at her, stunning her hand, knocking the blade away before the other came careening down, forcing him back. S of Yukin became painful jabs and the weapons master danced around him, furious, evasive, and progressively more fatal. S became finishing blows that she had seen her father use in his days in the Black Ops, blows that he had expressly told her not to use on friends. He's just so. She had surprised herself when she had his shoulder open. Tenten thought to pause for a moment and her brain felt like scrambled eggs. His only reaction was to retaliate with twice the force. Neji had into her stomach with a spike of Yukin that left her breathless and cross-eyed, and they leapt a second later in unison, utterly possessed, so stubborn and arrogant that there was no chance either would back down. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. She hadn't thought to evade. Tenten was unable to think at all. The same could be said for an equally angry Neji who had come after her with hopelessly fast and unavoidable strikes that were sealing off Tenketsu. Vicious and eyes blurred with pain and rage, Tenten let the blade down expertly with a practiced motion that halted his attack. It wasn't a particularly wound because she had missed. If it had hit his exposed back before he had thought to move, it would have been. The sword had raked mostly skin, a few inches of it on his right flank, and the bee was everywhere. Neji struck her again, trying to put distance between them while his brain no longer functioning. She was reeling with pain. Both were on their last legs and were tackled at the same time, completely blindsided. Guy had headlocked Neji and thrown him down with a thud, eyes nearly bugging out of his head. Lee had taken Tenten and discarded her sword, pinning her flailing, weapon-throwing arms. A true catastrophe for Team 13. Tenten could no longer hold in the cry of pain from the purplish, B points lining her arms and abdomen. He had nailed her, she admitted. Lee's frightened cooing was indistinguishable beneath her agonized wails as he grappled with her, fearing he was hurting her more. Neji had regained his wits rather quickly, just in time to feel Guy's fist meet his cheek, knocking him back to the ground again. His head was spinning and the bee, ugh, it was unusual. In his time knowing Tenten, never had she once actually, terribly injured him. It was unpleasant and satisfying all at once. When had she grown so destructive? Under his very nose. Guy stood menacingly between the Hyuga prodigy, who had been applying pressure to the sea on his back, and Tenten, who was writhing away in pain from Lee's arms. That was the final straw. This is inexcusable. Their sensei's voice was much louder than they had ever heard it before. I will not tolerate such unyouthful and savage behavior, most especially between trusted teammates. What in the good, righteous name of Earth has gotten into the both of you, my disappointing pupils? Lee had flinched under hearing Guy's booming, indignant voice. His grip tightened around Tenten, who had stopped her trashing. Her sense had returned and she was appreciative of Lee's concern, but she didn't want it. She didn't want anything. She didn't regret anything. What had happened was necessary, no matter what her sensei said. Guy's outraged monologue continued. How dare you two commit to such violence? More than anyone, my two prodigies know better than to turn against each other. There is a clear line of difference between sparring and fighting, and I will not permit violence on this team. Neji's eyes were narrowed in Lee's general direction. He needed an aspirin. Or 5. Lee's distress was unfathomable. He couldn't believe his team was falling to shambles at a critical time like this. Even more dubious to him was that Tenten would even consider attacking Neji after she had confided in Lee her admiration of the Hyuga prodigy. It didn't add up. Make amends. Guy's demand was simple and unmitigated. If either of you show such unyouthful disrespect to each other again, you will answer to the Hokage. Is that understood? He was met with silence, but he accepted it as a valid answer. Lee, we will now continue with your training. Guy didn't bother giving him the option. Tenten and Neji would have to sort out their issues without intervention. Lee stood obediently and gave a look of confusion and worry to the Kanoiki of his team. He followed Guy, who was still agitated beyond recognition. Miffed and horridly bruised, Tenten got to her feet and hobbled over to Neji. Her pride had never been more injured. It was hard for her to believe that Sakura's genjutsu during the exam had her in fear of harming her teammates, and yet she had no fear of tearing Neji to ribbons. Perhaps she had overcome her fear, or just hadn't wrapped her head around it yet. He'll be fine, the friggin' prick. She suddenly wished she had hurt him more seriously. She didn't want to tend to his wounds, but with Guy watching her like a furious hawk from a few meters away, she had no choice. Tenten settled behind him. He was sitting on the dusty ground and beat profusely. He said nothing as she tugged rudely at his shirt, pulling it over his head and fishing through her back holster for gauze and bandages. She was pleased to find she also had a small vial of rubbing alcohol with her, not like my weapons aren't sanitary. For her, even weapons needed hygiene, but he's got to understand that he's not getting off easy. Guy's frown threatened the longevity of his face, and he decided it would be better if Lee was distracted from the chaos. Lee. Run 500 laps around Konoha. Keep your leg weights on. Yes, sensei. He chirped and departed, trying to figure out what had happened. Tenten had saw to the gash on his side first and made sure that the Hyuga's teeth were clenched in pain before she laid off the disinfectant, and reached around his waist to wrap up the wound. The bee had slowed considerably. His shoulder was mended more quickly, though she was honestly surprised with his near imperceptible yelp of pain. Maybe I did get through to him. Maybe. Guy's glare was not the like of the ones he gave to Kakashi, all in good sport. He had not been close to such a level of discontent since Tama's days at the Ninja Academy, where havoc had struck one terrible day, ruining her hopes of graduating. Neji hadn't even been able to replace his shirt before he was made to reopen all of the tenketsu he had sealed, relieving Tenten marginally of her excruciation. He made no effort to apologize. He wasn't sorry. Neither of you may leave until you have come to an understanding. Guy had one final word before he left. You owed it to each other as teammates. Once he had gone, very little had changed. They sat in the dirt, angry and stubborn. The silence was imbued with tension and confusion. Neither of the two were exactly sure why their fracas had escalated to the intensity it had. They had been angry, but were unable to fully remember why. Tenten was first to recall the reason. Why? He looked up at her, questioningly, his wrath wavering. Why what? Neji would rather not be subject to meaningless inquiries at the moment. How could you do that to your own cousin? Oh, that was a bit more decisive. Still, the last person he had to answer to about his family matters to was her. Her allegiance was to him, not Hinata. She wasn't allowed to take it back. It was nothing personal. Her anger only multiplied. Neji clearly wasn't trying to fix the situation. He was encouraging it. It was the only thing he knew how to do. He made note of her scowl and pulled his shirt back on, not thanking her for seeing to his injuries. After all, she had been the one who had inflicted them. Neji was mad at her simply because she did not concede. Not like every other time she had when they had trained together. This time she had pushed it too far. She had tested him. As new and interesting as it had been, even with her new strength he had miscalculated, she wasn't allowed to be stubborn. He always won. That wouldn't change. Something about her was different and he had yet to decide if he liked it. Your own match wasn't so smooth either, Tenten. He pointed out and she turned away, trying to forget the fact that Sakura hadn't been in a much better position than Hinata had. Neji had a point, but still, even if she couldn't explain it, she knew he was wrong this time. Tenten just had to figure out how to show him that. Apparently, her use of weapons wasn't going to help. Neji, you have no idea what I've been through. She stood up after he did, her voice was a low growl, but she wouldn't allow herself to lose control again. Stop acting like you do. What makes you think you know what has happened to me then? He wasn't about to let her win, you could never understand. She fell quiet again, fed up with him. Why was it that he so badly did not want to listen? Why couldn't he accept the fact she had nearly beaten him? Him. Or that he had nearly done the same to Hinata? Tenten had wanted to ask him, but he spoke again. He sounded almost sad, but she knew better. It seems that there is very little we really do know about each other then. He concluded. He wouldn't look at her and it was better that way. Her stomach was hurting and not because he had punched it. When Neji walked away she looked down at her hands curiously, wondering how she had not noticed his bee on him earlier. He had bled a lot. Something told her it wouldn't be the last time either. Guy-sensei would be pleased they were at least talking to each other, but they were still far from an understanding. I've been a fool, she decided, beginning to collect her weapons that were scattered about the place. If he won't listen to me, then maybe he's better off just. She didn't want to think about what his future held. That night Gaara had once again joined his siblings in order to get reacquainted. It was going well. Much to Gaara's disappointment, Haku hadn't taken the news about his brother and sister as well as Naruto had. He almost objected to it. Gaara couldn't understand the reason why. Haku was all for rediscovering lost families, most especially his own. It bothered him very little, at the time, but later on he began to wonder if Haku had a lack in trust in him because he was related to Temari. Please understand I will not hold back, Haku had said before he had went to bed, tired and annoyed. I have no reason to. She is my opponent. Gaara had told him that it was fine and that he understood, hoping it would help Haku invest more trust in him. He would not his bond with Haku in order to forge one with Temari and Kankuro. Haku had won out, fair and square. He had been there for him all his life as Naruto had been, and he wasn't about to overlook that fact. Naruto had told him that Haku had his doubts about Temari and Kankuro and that was why he had refused to meet them. Gaara had believed he was just being oversensitive, as that was his way. But Haku did tend to be very temperamental in issues involving family ties. Jealousy was not beyond him, considering that his reunion with his remaining clan was nigh impossible. Naruto had said not to worry about it. He said he'd handle Haku if he decided to get moody. So there he sat on the rooftop beside his family, staring at the crescent moon suspended in the sky. He had hoped that Haku would return to his senses before the final stage of the exam, but the outlook did not look very good even with Naruto's reassurance. Your teammates will think that you're avoiding them if you come by this much. Kankuro pointed out. He was aware that their presence had disturbed the equilibrium of his brotherhood, or so Jiraiya had labeled it. I don't think so. Temari had also been gazing at the sliver of the moon in the night sky. She had considered that Gaara, being a link between herself and her future opponent, may feel the pressure to prep her on Haku's abilities. I don't want you preparing me for my match, I hope you know. It never crossed my mind. She smiled genuinely in response. Kankuro folded his arms behind his head, deep in thought. There were many questions he had been wanting to ask. They still wouldn't be sufficient enough to get answers about the time they had spent apart. It would be too much to ask of his brother. Gaara kept watch of the moon, basking peacefully in their presence. It was calming. He still found it unbelievable they had been reunited under such conditions. After the initial shock of it, they had all felt relieved. Temari observed him for a long moment and then hesitantly asked, Gaara, were you happier living here than back in Suna? It was quiet. Yes. Her expression saddened, but she understood. How could he not be? Here he wasn't a monster. Here he had friends who loved him and accepted him for who he was. Here there was a future and back there was pain. He then added, much to her surprise, but I've dreamed of you. The two sand ninja were silent, taking in what Gaara had said, unsure of what he had meant. I wonder why Dad never came looking for you. Kankuro speculated, unable to understand it. You've been here all this time, never too far away. Gaara said nothing. He didn't want to talk about their father. The troubled looks on their faces confirmed Gaara's suspicions. They were holding back. There's something you're not telling me. The red-haired boy's voice was low and partially offended. Kankuro had hoped it wouldn't come to this. What? We've been talking non-stop since we met up. What have we been hiding? Besides the whole invasion of this village. His mind supplied blandly and he was starting to hate himself for not saying anything, but neither he nor Temari could. Maybe we can take him back with us before it happens. Maybe we can spare him. Your sensei is never around, Gaara's observations were as keen as ever, and your teammate knows much about me. That can't be helped. He's overheard too much, that idiot, Temari snapped, not bothering to defend Miyosuke. You've done him a service, Gaara, by breaking his arms. That's not what teammates should say about each other. Really? Well, someone should explain that to Miyosuke because he just doesn't get it. Kankuro spat, equally disgusted with him. Gaara could see his point. Why treat a teammate well if they simply disregard you? He pitied them for their rotten luck in team placement. He, however, had the best luck of anyone in his village. Or at least was lucky enough to have Iruka organize his team. Temari's reluctance faded away and she spoke again, knowing the subject would be very delicate. Gaara, you should really consider coming back with us to Suna. Father doesn't want me back. He won't want me back. But we do. Kankuro sided with his sister. We can fix things. We have to try. Gaara shook his head, unwilling to even consider leaving. I cannot go with you. You can and you should. Temari wouldn't take no for an answer, not when he was here in front of them, not when he was alive for the first time in a long time. Ending up in Konoha has separated you from your family. You can have it back if you want. I have never been without my family, he said simply, stunning them. They have always been there for me. There was a long, painful moment in which both Temari and Kankuro realized he was not referring to them at all. Gaara returned his gaze to the moon, his mind made up, and I will always be there for them. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.